How can we get students to learn what we want them to learn? How can we design teaching that engages the learner, has appropriate content and a clear path of achievement? When we look to create or redesign a program, course or teaching session, often we start thinking about the content that needs to be covered, or assessments are devised that somehow don't match with our learning intentions. So before jumping in, we first need to take a step back and think about our learning design in relation to what we want our learners to do or know by the end of the learning experience. How will we and our learners know that they've learned what we wanted them to learn? And what teaching content can support these other two elements? The interlinking and alignment between these three elements is key for a thoughtfully designed, learner-centered experience. Education researchers Biggs and Tang called this constructive alignment. So let's see how this approach can guide your learning designs. Okay, let's start by separating and considering these two words, constructive and alignment. The alignment part is quite straightforward in the sense that there are three elements to this framework that are interdependent and, if explicitly linked, can lead to improved outcomes. The constructive part is informed by the theory of constructivism. And if you want to find out more about this learning theory, hit the card above. But basically, the theory argues that knowledge is not disseminated from educator to student, but instead knowledge is constructed or created by the student. The responsibility for learning is therefore shared between the learner and the educator. Constructive alignment builds on this concept by deliberately identifying three elements that can inform educators in the design and facilitation of teaching and inform learners of their required journey. So let's look more closely at the three elements. The first is related to what we mentioned earlier. What do you want your students to do or know by the end of the learning experience? In terms of constructive alignment, this is addressed by providing clear, measurable, intended learning outcomes. These intended learning outcomes guide your learning design and inform your learner of what they should have achieved by the end of the learning experience. Intended learning outcomes are written from the student's perspective, indicating the level of understanding and performance they are expected to achieve as a result of engaging in the learning experience. Intended learning outcomes are often developed using action verbs. This can help indicate lower order versus higher order thinking, inform the selection of appropriate activities to achieve them, and can inform which modality those activities can be delivered in. This first element is the key component of the learning design approach because it provides direction and consistency to your teaching by focusing in on what should be achieved. Educators often comment that they don't have enough time to cover content. If this is the case, go back and review your learning outcomes. If your content doesn't address them, then consider if that content is essential to your session. Remember, in learner-centered education, we're looking to provide the learner with a richer, deeper learning experience to achieve desired learning outcomes and not just cover content. So the intended learning outcomes help you establish what you want your learners to do or know. The next step is to consider how will you and your learners know that they've learned what you set out for them. Informed by the intended learning outcomes, appropriate assessment can be created that links to or aligns to your learning outcomes. So you want to achieve X in your teaching, and you'll know that outcome's been met when the learners can show Y. So now you've clearly identified the goalpost of what your learners should know through the development of intended learning outcomes, and how you and your learners will know those intentions have been achieved through appropriate assessment. You can now think about what teaching content and activities you will provide. This is where your intended learning outcomes action verbs can help guide the selection and development of appropriate, engaging teaching and learning activities that both meet the outcome and adequately prepare the learner for the assessment. So this is the sequence I would initially take, but as constructive alignment is a dynamic process, you could also follow your learning outcomes by selecting your teaching and learning activities and then the assessments. The point is that there is this interplay and reliance on all three elements. So if you decide to adjust or redevelop one of the elements, then there is likely to be impact on the other two elements for you to consider to ensure your teaching stays well aligned and well designed. Okay, so I hope you got value from this introduction to constructive alignment. If you did, please hit like and consider subscribing.